Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Last week, I promised we were getting close to actually finishing our math in regards to what was the true story of what was happening with Social Security. A couple of our PhD economists have spent months, and we put it together. But I first want to talk a little bit about the politics of telling the truth around this place. Then I want to talk about the reality of that the Democrats are brothers and sisters on the left, either willfully or through ignorance. Their solution just doesn't get you there. And the immorality. So let's first walk through something. How many of you have heard over and over and over and over from me behind this microphone that in 2033, 2034, 25% cut because the Social Security Trust Fund is emptied? And I had a debate the other day with a Democrat member here who's running for another office, and she's going, Social Security doesn't contribute at all to the debt and deficit. She's absolutely right. That's not what we're discussing. What we're discussing is 8 or 9 years, we're going to double senior poverty. The average couple in America in 2033, I'm going to use 2034 because at least that's more of a consensus number for the exhaustion of the trust fund. That average couple in America will take a $17,400 cut. Articles that we've been collecting of the number of baby boomers who are ending up homeless. They're ending up on the street. We're looking at numbers that would explode of that type of just dystopian vision. And yet, if you get behind this microphone and tell the truth about the math, right now, some troll in a basement is writing something saying, Schweikert mentioned Social Security, let's attack. Same thing with Medicare. This society is absolutely immoral. We have this obligation to modernize, to save, to protect. And if you step up and try to do it, you will be attacked. There's a reason we call it the third rail. Well, screw them. We're going to tell the truth here. And part of the morality here is, how do you save something? How do you modernize it? How do you protect seniors? When everyone runs away from the discussion, runs away from the actuarial reports, because the moment you start to tell the truth, you're a target. Now, most of it's not true. I had someone in my office just a couple hours ago bring me something saying, look, there's this person who's writing editorials in your district saying you voted against Social Security. And going, okay, let's see. I actually used to chair the subcommittee over Social Security, trying to work out the math and those things to save it. I don't remember ever having a vote in this place to change it. We looked it up. There hasn't been. But this is the way politics works anymore. Make crap up, and then you wonder why it's toxic. It is so much easier around here to pretend. Somehow pretend magic is going to fall out of the sky and everything's going to be fine. So let's actually walk through a couple things here. One of the things, it just, because this bothers me, my sarcasm of this is a math-free zone. I listened to a number of people, both Republicans and Democrats, get behind these microphones today, and they have no understanding of the scale of the problem. So let's actually just do a little bit of very simple math off the top of our head so you understand some of the scale. Yesterday, interest rates popped up a bit. They came down a bit today. But I think at one point yesterday, they were up 14 basis points. And this, I just need this to be an example. The math is not going to be perfect. Okay, 14 basis points. 1% on 34.2 trillion would be $342 billion of interest, right? And a basis point is 1/100th. So 1 basis point would be $3.4 billion, right? Disagree with me. So the 14 basis point movement in interest rates yesterday on 10-year sovereigns, if that had stuck throughout this year, that's what, $48 billion. Understand, we're here knifing ourselves over fractions and fractions of a day's interest. We borrow about $7.5 billion a day. We borrow $85,000 a second. But here's the scam. We will knife each other back and forth over math that's the real numbers. This is important. But doing everything we can to avoid explaining the scale when a single day's interest rate movement is almost $50 billion. And then you hear members here come behind the microphone, it was $6 billion. Well, that was less than a day's worth of borrowing. Interest. I don't mean the total borrowing. And I know I'm a bit exasperated, but I'm frustrated because there's this unwillingness to understand the scale of the problem. So let's actually start to walk through the charts and try to get this. And I have a mistake on this chart, and I owe everyone an apology. Our math right now is we're heading to borrowing between about 2.7 to over 3 trillion this year. And remember, it was only several months ago, CBO and OMB and all those were saying, it's only going to be like a $1.6 trillion borrow. Something's horribly wrong. We've doubled it, but we've doubled it in a time when the economy is actually doing fairly well. Understand what these higher interest rates mean. Understand what the growth in healthcare costs. So right now, this was our projection. We're going to borrow $1.45 trillion. That's our Social Security. That's coming out of the trust fund and out of your taxes you're paying every single day. The next line item is where we had a mistake. We were saying gross interest was going to go over $1 trillion, making interest the second most expensive thing in this government. And we also came back and also showed that net interest was still the second most expensive. Difference between net and gross is the interest we pay back to trust funds for borrowing the money. Net is only publicly held. The rest of the world doesn't make that distinction. It's just one of the things we do in the United States. That's why if you ever see something from OECD, they have the United States at like 144% of debt to GDP. It's because they put back in the borrowing from trust funds. Okay. Well, it turns out Treasury, a few hours ago, did one of their monthly updates. And I have to apologize to everyone that interest, gross interest for the year wasn't $1.003 trillion. I got it wrong. It turns out it's going to be $1.067 trillion. And we think this number is off because we've been looking at the Treasury receipts, the growth of the spending, growth of healthcare, growth of interest. My math now is just interest. This year will be 1.1 trillion. $1.1 billion. I'm sorry, say it in a way people could understand. No one knows what 12 zeros are. When I speak about $1 trillion with my brothers and sisters, my members of Congress, our staff, they just sort of stare at you. What you need to understand is this is a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. Trillion, 1,000 billion. But yet we're going to sit here and knife each other for months and months and months over a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of this because we don't want to actually deal with the actual structural crisis. We got old. The fact of the matter, it's uncomfortable to talk about. But unless we do some things revolutionary on the cost of health care and dramatically change government, it doesn't work. Basic math. Every dime of defense is now borrowed. Every dime of discretionary now is borrowed. And if you start to look at this math, it's about $1.4 trillion of Medicare, of the stuff we don't even get to vote on. Every dime a member of Congress votes on is now borrowed. We are clicking off another $1 trillion of borrowing every 140 days. And if you think you're going to fix that by a rounding error on this little piece of discretionary, this little piece here, the game of avoidance. I've had members here who will, when I start to talk about a deficit commission where we're going to have to do major redesign. Oh, David, I can't vote for that. Oh, well, I have too many groups, but I will fight like hell to save a few $100 million here and there. That's real money. We're borrowing $85,000 a second. $7.4 billion a day. But it's great theater for our voters. Now, it's horrible math. Great theater. So understand, even the Treasury statement now confirms my math. We're borrowing over $1 trillion in interest. Just the interest borrow. And total borrowing looks like it may be coming in be closer to 2.7 to 3 trillion this year. So let's do a quick walkthrough before we get to the stuff where I soak myself in kerosene and light myself on fire. What happened between the 22 fiscal year and 23 fiscal year? Well, first off, if we actually take a look, Social Security spending, but it comes out of the trust fund, comes out of tax receipts, was up 11.1% in a single year. Between fiscal year 22 and 23, if you take a look, the spending on Medicare, just Medicare, not Medicaid, not Indian Health Services, not veterans, just Medicare. Spending was up 12.3. Interest, up 38.7%. Anyone see a trend here? And we're trying to track these same sort of numbers for this fiscal year. Maybe no one really cares. I know these numbers are really big. It's easier to scream and yell and worry about a shiny object or some latest conspiracy theory. You don't need a conspiracy theory. Just look at the math. So let's actually have an honest conversation of first how much trouble Social Security is and why it's absolutely moral that we keep our promises, that we actually tell the truth of here's how we're going to modernize it, here's how we're going to save it, here's what we have to do to fix it. And the reality, it has to be done with our Democrat colleagues. They got to stop using it as a tool to win elections. And what's fascinating in the polling, I think it's FreedomWorks did some polling recently saying if you're sort of under 45, under 50, you understand this math. If you're over, you don't, you're almost like pretending it doesn't exist. What happens to you? Think about yourselves. What happens to you if it's 8 years, 9 years from now, and you get a nice letter from Social Security saying we're cutting your check by 25%? I'm going to show a chart here, but remember my words. The average will be a $17,400 cut in 2033 or 2034, depending on if you use CBO's number or the Social Security actuaries. And look, one of our structural problems is 1960, we had 5.1 workers. In 2035, we were saying 2.3. We've been told this number's wrong. It's actually less. But we're trying to vet that number. But remember, Social Security was designed as a pay-as-you-go system. If you pay attention to some of these presentations, I've come here a dozen times and shown the average couple gets every dime back they put into Social Security plus about a $72,000 spiff. Okay. Horrible rate of return. But you do get your money back plus a little bit of a spiff. But it's a horrible rate of return. I want all of you to remember as we talk about this potential misery that 20 years ago when Republicans got up and said, if we could just take a little sliver and do some other things with it. And when we got to the 2030s, we'd have a system that was actually more robust and people would have a much higher rate of return. Turns out they told the truth. When those activists told you, oh, they're trying to steal your money, this and that, try to remember this. They lied to you, and we now have 20 years of data to prove it. But the big lie around here continues because it's great politics. Scare the crap out of people and then make sure they don't actually read an actuary report because that might require math, and this is a math-free zone. So let's actually walk through this. We're going to use 2034 because that's the one date we absolutely can vet, even though CBO says 2033. They both agree on a 25.2% cut in benefits. So 2034, our best math is that very first year, single year number, $616 billion shortfall. That just means the trust fund is emptied, and without the trust fund to back up the payroll tax that's coming in, and then offset to the beneficiaries that there's more beneficiary checks, we got a $616 billion shortfall. That's where you get your 25% cut. And you start to understand for lower income workers who are receiving Social Security as a couple, that's a $10,600 cut. For the average, it's that $17,400 I was talking about. For high income couples, it's over $23,000. Remember, there is actually a formula within Social Security for lower income workers with their 40 quarters get a little bit more than higher income workers. It's part of the formula. So here's the math. It is conservative math. We worked like hell on, well, the joint economic economists worked like hell on this. My job was just to torment them. 2034. 2034, if you do the Democrats, the president's solution of saying, hey, just take people over $400,000 and make them pay the 12.4%. Okay, so we right now, I think this year it's 168 something is subject to Social Security tax. And you have this like donut hole in this plan. For everyone else, in today's world, you get that 168. If you're above that, you're not paying the Social Security tax anymore. On this math, understand this. This is sort of the Democrats, the president's plan is, we're just going to tax people who make $400,000 and up and make them pay the 12.4%, but we're not going to give them any benefits for it. Okay, fine. All right. It doesn't get you close. So this is your new revenue. Our best model is you might get about $259 billion of income into Social Security doing it that way. But you slow down the economy, that would be general tax revenues. And over here is your still remaining shortfall. You still have, what is that? $417 billion shortfall in that single year. And you've already done the Democrat plan, and you still have $417 billion shortfall. So next time you see an AARP attack ad on someone because they were willing to try to talk about saving Social Security, I hope they tell you the truth, saying, hey, you know, our plan we've supported of raising this tax that looks like it doesn't even cover half. Matter of fact, it only covers like 30, 40% of the shortfall. So let's actually go to the next level. Well, actually, I did this chart just to basically re-emphasize what's going on in those math. Shortfall, tax receipts. Tax receipts with the higher tax receipts without it, because it also actually has an effect on the general fund. General fund tax receipts go down. All right, so now let's go to the other proposal. Well, let's not do people $400,000 and up. Let's do everyone at $250,000 and up. Remember, this is 8-9 years from now. Okay? Remember, we're now working on we should be working, it's not like we're doing anything useful here, the 2025 fiscal year budget. So now we're talking about the 2033, 2034 fiscal budgets. Well, if you take everyone that makes $250,000 and up, and you subject them to the 12.4%, okay, fine. You get our best model, about $380 billion of taxes, leaving $237 billion short, and you slowed down tax receipts by $88 billion. So you're going to have $325 billion shortfall. Okay, well, that's not good enough. Let's just get rid of the caps altogether. So you make one, if you were making 168 today, doesn't matter. There is no 168. It's just everyone pays the 12.4%. You still have pretty much the exact same shortfall because that gap doesn't produce that much tax receipts between no cap and the $250,000 gap. So still, model is almost identical. You slow down tax receipts by $88 billion. The shortfall is 234. So you're basically back to what? 324? No, 322. My reason we do this is not to end my political career, but to tell the truth. Is it moral to be basically, it's right in front of us, it's coming, we know it's coming. There's actuary reports from Social Security, from CBO, from private groups, those around us. Then there's the political ones who just lie to you because they want you to send them a contribution or they want Democrats to win the next election, which I believe those groups are absolutely immoral. I believe what the Democrats have been doing is absolutely immoral. But damn it, they care about winning the election, next election a hell lot more than they care about doubling senior poverty, of the number of baby boomers who are expected to be homeless in a decade. And somehow, when they say, oh, we'll just take care of the shortfall, we'll just get rid of the cap on rich people, it doesn't get you where you got to go. Is there any leadership around here other than, me as an idiot getting behind this microphone and telling people the truth? And then I've done presentations on also what's happening on Medicare. And guess what? It's multiples of the problem of this one. The difference here is we have a specific trust fund so we can see the date it expires. I beg of you, if you're a voter out there, don't let some politician squirm out of, well, if we just tax rich people more, we'd have plenty of money. That's not true. Demand. Look, I don't have all the answers, but I bet you I can make this work. It'd be painful, but I bet you I can find a way to not let the collapse happen. Demand the morality that this government's going to keep its promises. This chart here is now 2 years old. The top line here is not $116 trillion of debt. Now it's assumed to be closer to $130 trillion of debt over the next 30 years. Every dime of debt between today and 30 years. And yes, I don't know if the mics are picking up. My 19-month-old is in the back screaming. Yes, I have a 19-month-old. That's a different discussion. Does that child deserve to have the same life the rest of us have had? Here's the math. 100% of the borrowing, it's coming. Interest. The shortfall of Medicare, because remember, the vast majority of Medicare spending comes straight out of the general fund, and the Medicare trust fund is scheduled to be emptied, in 7 years? Okay? But Part A trust fund is really primarily just hospital coverage. This is if we actually say, we're not going to fix the Social Security trust fund, we're just going to borrow the money. We're just going to borrow the money. If you update what that means, about $130 trillion of borrowing. The crazy thing is the CBO math, is actually the rest of government, military, discretionary, which military is discretionary, but all non-defense discretionary, actually, over the 30 years, when adjusted for inflation, actually falls. That little portion actually has like a $3 billion, actually $3 trillion positive. The rest of it's about 130 trillion negative. Who's going to tell you that? Come on, it's all over. I mean, you can go, if anyone actually reads the reports, it's there. So, but that's uncomfortable. We will spend maybe this next year doing really important stuff with failed legislation, failed votes, and every single day we're going to click off another $7.5 billion of borrowing. But we'll give some beautiful speeches of how we're fighting to save this little tiny bit of money, but we're not going to tell you it's little tiny. I've seen fights on the floor that in the time the fight on the floor took, the interest clock on U.S. borrowing used up more money than the debate was fighting to save. In Washington, it's always about the money. Group after group after group after group after group are wandering the hallways this time of year, all with wonderful things for us to spend more money on. Many of them are things you really like. And they get outraged at you when you start to pull out these charts and say, could we talk about what's going on? Once again, I'll do this as my closing. Every dime of defense is borrowed. Every dime of discretionary is borrowed, and now 1.4 trillion of mandatory, things we don't even get to vote on, is now borrowed. And we're going to give these beautiful speeches of, I'm trying to save $16 billion, which is a lot of money, except it's like 2.25 days of borrowing. And we fought over that sort of amount for 7 months. And in that time, we clicked off well over another $1 trillion of borrowing because we fight over the shiny little objects instead of the willingness to actually have an honest conversation about the structural crisis, because this is politically easy. You get a nice little spot on Twitter or Facebook or on social media, maybe even a hit on cable television, but it's a lie. How do you save this place when it won't even put batteries in its calculator? With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House stand adjourned.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.